Do you want to know what the most contagious thing is in the entire world? Well, check out this video to find out. The answer will surprise you. Hello, my name is Jesse. Welcome to the channel Open Source Owners, where we talk about what if humans had an owner's manual. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, this would definitely be in there. And the answer is, not to give it away too soon, other people, humans. The social aspect of being alive. I use the biopsychosocial spiritual model, as you can see up here in the corner of the screen. Today's video is all about the social aspect, so that's why I have that highlighted. So let's talk about how it is that I can come to claim that other people are the most contagious thing in the world. And of course, that's not an empirical statement necessarily. It is just something to consider, and it expands the understanding, our understanding of what contagion even is. And it brings into the picture something that is truly profoundly contagious, which is the social domain of being a human. It's really, really critical, as you shall see. You may have seen these studies. If your friend smokes, you are 61% more likely to smoke. If a friend of your friend smokes, you are still 29% more likely to smoke. And if a friend of a friend of a friend smokes, you are 11% more likely to smoke. It almost gets like ridiculous. It's like the nesting dolls or something. In these second two bullet points, this is saying your friend doesn't smoke, but they have a friend who does, or they have a friend of a friend who does. So there's some deep social sort of thread that connects all these things together, even though we may not really even be in proximity to these individuals. You know, how often do you hang out with a friend of a friend? Or a friend of a friend of a friend, right? So this is a very fascinating sort of topic of discovery, and it continues. If your friend is happy, you are 6% more likely to be happy yourself. Now, 6% seems small, but compare it to this. So if you get a $10,000 raise at your job, that only equivalates to a 2% increase in happiness. So I don't know about you, but a $10,000 raise in my job would be like, wow, that's pretty significant. I would think it would elevate my happiness, my overall satisfaction in life higher than 2%, but that is what the statistics show. However, just having a friend who is happy increases your likelihood of being that threefold from a $10,000 raise. So think of it like that. Even though 6% seems small, think of it as a threefold increase over, say, somebody gave you a $10,000 a year raise. Here's another one. If a friend of yours becomes obese, you are 45% more likely to gain weight over the next 2 to 4 years. So that's 50-50 basically, right? If a friend of your friend becomes obese, you are 20% more likely to gain weight. And just like the first one, if a friend of your friend becomes obese, you are still 10% more likely than chance to gain weight over, I think it's over that 2 to 4 year period. So this is the contagion of being around other people. It's very critical who you end up spending time with for these particular reasons. So the people you habitually associate with determine as much as 95% of your success or failure in life. That is a quote from Dr. David McKellen. You can look him up if you want to, but just take that in, even if it's somewhere in the ballpark of true. That's a tremendous statement to say, and this shows why, you know, maybe even above the biological and the social aspects to the human, the social domain is really profoundly influential. It's something that's like an external aspect of ourself, but that actually really feeds back and reflects to ourself the type of quality of life that we're going to have. I mean, it's not to be underestimated. Having a strong social support is a better predictor of survival than physical activity, air pollution, and smoking. So you'd be better off smoking cigarettes. Don't do that. It's not good for you. But you'd be better off smoking cigarettes regularly, but having a strong social support network than you would, you know, not smoking, being physically fit, breathing clean air, but not having a social support system. We are experiencing globally, but especially in the United States of America and other westernized countries, really an epidemic of loneliness. And we'll talk more about the epidemic of loneliness in other videos, but if we look at the ramifications of loneliness right now, it'll stand alone as sort of a stark testament to how important it is to be socially connected. So one way to think about this is we have become helplessly independent. But that is a quote that I really liked, helplessly independent. It's all good and fine to have a spirit of individualism or a spirit of independence or pull yourself up by your bootstraps sort of ethos. However, there is a sort of a place that you reach in that spectrum where you become too independent and you actually start to lose your capacities as a social human, and that can create all sorts of issues down the road, as we shall see. So physical and mental health outcomes are significantly worse when isolated or lonely, or helplessly independent. I can do it alone, I don't need anybody, that sort of thing. Well, it's no small joke. 29% higher risk for heart disease when you live as a self-identified lonely or isolated individual. That's 30% more likelihood of having cardiac arrest, 32% for stroke, 25% for cancer, 1 in 4, 40% more likely to develop Alzheimer's if you're socially isolated. I mean, that's an incredible figure, 40%. And then, of course, just premature mortality, just straight up all-cause death, 26% more likely. So hopefully we're painting a picture here that the social world is critical. And again, we'll talk more about the social aspect of things when I've got more statistics to pad out the idea that we're living in an epidemic of loneliness. We'll talk about that in other videos. But for now, let's take another look at one way that the social aspect, relational things, can be just as contagious as a germ or something like that. Here I'm going to cite the work Depression is Contagious by the wonderful Michael Yapkow. He's a fantastic writer and author and speaker on all things depression. If you struggle with depression periodically or you know someone that does, you could do much worse than to get any of his books, including this one. If you want this book, click the link below. I have my book resources, and that is in there. You can check that out. So let's start with some basic understanding of depression. And again, we'll do a much more deeper dive into depression later, but just touching on it here. I don't know if you knew this, but depression since 2020 is the second greatest cause of human suffering and disability across the world. And that's WHO. It's something like 400 million people a year will suffer from depression. And now here are some quotes from Michael Yapkow out of the book. Social skills have declined and relationships have become less rewarding and effective. As a result, the vulnerability to depression has increased. So as we see that epidemic of loneliness, what we see as a result, a natural result, is a vulnerability to depression. Not a genetic predisposition, but an epigenetic vulnerability. And that's really where the story lies in terms of depression and most mood disorders. For every depressed patient who gets treatment, at least 4 more don't. Okay, so think about that. For every depressed person who doesn't get treatment, their depression, so that's the 4 more who don't get treatment, right? Their depression then ends up affecting the lives of at least 3 others. So you can see that this is sort of an exponential growth pattern happening with depression, untreated depression. And for every depressed patient who goes without treatment, their child is at least 3 times more likely to become depressed than the child of a non-depressed person. Again, the contagion factor, the epigenetic factor, rather than it's written in my genes and I'm just fated to have depression because it's in my family. It's not really the way it works. And the final quote here, the zinger at the end is, relationships can spread depression as surely as germs can spread disease. And whether germs spread disease the way we understood it or not, relationships definitely spread illness, including depression, anxiety, apathy, self-involvement or narcissism, rage. All of these things are spreadable within social networks that we would call typically a society, right? Now, the other thing to say about depression real quick is we're talking about patients who get treated or don't get treated. Well, unfortunately, the treatment model that we have for depression is not all that effective. Many individuals who are just on antidepressants alone experience no greater than a placebo benefit. Our treatments of depression over time we're using more and more pharmaceuticals, we're using more and more access to talk therapy and things like that, but nonetheless, we're still seeing an exponential rise in depression. Now, luckily, in the last 10 to 15 years, we've really seen some cutting-edge therapies that have been able to get to root causes of depression. One of the root causes being the social landscape, the social isolation, social loneliness. The other root causes, though, are in those other 3 areas that are written up top here. The biological domain, not genetic, but biological, like, hey, I don't have enough vitamin D, or I don't have enough vitamin B12, or my mitochondria aren't working well. That's the biological origin of depression, and that can be a game changer for people. Sometimes just getting the biological domain really sort of tuned up, depression goes away, anxiety goes away, just from that one domain. Now, that's not always, because we're complex beings and everybody has a different story. But another part of that story is the psychological domain, as you can see again up at the top. You had trauma, you had abuse, you had neglect. That piece is really critical to depression, and you'll have to address that if that's there. The social piece we're talking about today, finding a tribe, getting connected. There'll be more videos on what do we do about the social loneliness epidemic. We'll talk more about that in other videos. And then the last one, spiritual. Think of spiritual as like purpose or meaning or connection to a higher power. Could be nature, could be just like your own higher power within you, could be God, could be religion, whatever it is for you. But you can't take that out if you're atheist, because it still connects to meaning and purpose. And those two things are critical. And those two things, without them, cause much more likelihood of having depression. Now, this video was not about depression. It was about the most contagious thing in the entire world is really other people. And I just wanted to throw that idea out there and introduce this sort of like new take on contagion, but that really can be verified through a lot of the social and psychological sort of studies and understandings of the world. We are incredibly social. In fact, I have heard, and maybe you have too, that humans are the most social of all animals on Earth. And whether that's demonstrably true or not, it certainly is true that we are deeply social and deeply bonded to tribal reality and sharing perspective with multiple people into what I call the super brain, where it's not just your brain and separately my brain and separately her brain and separately his brain. When we have to work and live together and think together and problem solve together, we link our brains together to form basically a super form of intelligence that I just for fun call the super brain because it sounds cool. So again, more on this in the future. I just wanted to introduce this concept. And if you made it this far, I want to say thanks for making it this far. Do all the YouTube things with the likes and stuff. That's always helpful. But as always, the thing I'm most interested in is comments. What do you notice about the contagion of other people's? Do you notice that when your friends start behaving X, Y, or Z, you also are pulled to do that in some, for lack of a better word, with some contagious sort of energy? What have you noticed about being socially isolated? Are you struggling with that? You won't be alone, I guarantee you. So don't be shy for sharing that in the comments. And as you put things in the comments, we all get to learn a little bit more about the reality of some of these things that I'm talking about from the research. It's much better to put real people, real stories, and real reality to the picture to sort of flesh it out and make it more sensible and more practical. On that note, thank you so much for watching this video, taking your time out of your busy day. I really appreciate you. I will see you in the next video.